why don't we just put it down for the record here? What does the West have going for it?
Well, first of all, the development of everything that we regard as coming from science and medicine. Everything we think of as modernity is Western in origin. All the developments in medicine, the sciences, almost every one of them, certainly up till recent years, has been Western in origin. Let's take political order. Democracy, the idea of liberty, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom to think differently, freedom to vote, freedom to have a say in your future, the future of your country, peaceful transfer of power. These are, historically speaking, incredibly uncommon, except in the West, which is where they originated. The history of most peoples across the world is actually one group coming in and crushing another and taking their stuff. So the West found a way around that in the tradition of liberal democracy. That's even before we start on the cultural inheritance, philosophical inheritance, the religious inheritance, the traditions of Athens and Jerusalem, and the melding of these traditions. It's before you get on to the fact that the West has produced apart from, as I say, the scientific innovations, the artistic innovations that are unparalleled across the world. There are places which reach it, none which surpass it. There are systems, we put it this way as well, there's a curiosity about the West which is unreciprocated. It is Western scholars, derided by Said and others as Orientalists, who go to the Indian subcontinent and hand back the ancient languages because they rediscover them. It is still not the case that any First Nations peoples have gone to parts of the world and tried to discover lost civilizations and handed them back to the world. You know, there has been a curiosity in the West, an interest in the rest of the world, sometimes for the worse, for sure, often for the better. Everything we regard in terms of modern trade and commerce and the systems of it, the exercise of free capital, and as I say, I'm not even touching on the artistic legacy, and and then I can just, I can reel it off in cities. I mean, because, what have you given to the world? Say, well, Paris isn't bad for starters. Rome, Florence, Venice, Barcelona, Madrid, London, just to start with, the great cities of the world, and remain so as well, because we happen to have a veneration, or happened to have, I hope still do, a veneration for the past and a recognition that there was something we could build on. Not every society has that. I mean, I'm barely scratching the surface, as you can feel.
Of course, of course. If you haven't subscribed already, you can now try a 14-day free trial and get access to all of our deep dive interviews, documentaries, and exclusive content on Epoch TV, from American thought leaders to The Larry Elder Show. Just go to ept.ms/free trial yan. I can't help but thinking, and maybe this is this programming that we're discussing, but the argument that's made is, well, great, Douglas, but that was made on the backs of the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, it wasn't. It was made on the backs of an awful lot of people, including people in the West. The Industrial Revolution, for instance, in the United Kingdom, was done on the backs of British men and women who had very little choice in their own lives, by the way. And the average person, the average man working in a mill in the north of England died in his late 30s. Was the West only built on slavery? Certainly not. Definitely not. Provably not. Was it a part of it? Yes. But then, what do people think, or who do people think built all sorts of other things throughout history? Does anyone think the pharaohs lugged the stones themselves to build the temples or the pyramids? Did Alcibiades lug the stones to build the Parthenon himself? Of course not. All these things were done on the backs of slaves. That was a system which the world used across civilizations and across much of the world still. There are said to be around 40 million slaves in the world today, which means there are more slaves today than there were in the 19th century in the world. I think we have to be very wary in the current era of people who have not suffered themselves in any way, taking upon themselves the mantle of the suffering. What I mean by this is people who want to, since it's been such a long time since the colonial era, such a long time now since the era of slavery, none of it has anything to do with me. I have no guilt for it myself. I'm not interested in pretending I have any guilt. But I'm very wary of these people who pretend that they are oppressed by these long dead things. And I think they're shakedown merchants, and I think they're frauds. Nietzsche tells us in the genealogy of morals to be very wary of people who pick at scars long since healed and then cry about their wounds, you know. There's an awful lot of those people around at the moment.
Well, there are, but there's also people that have been convinced, right, as kind of in the way that we discussed a little bit earlier, that this is the way they should be.
Sure.
Somehow.
Yeah. Well, because they'd like to live as victims. Partly because we live in an era where we've persuaded ourselves that the person with the most victimhood gets the mic. Not something I believe. Sometimes it's very important to listen to a victim. Sometimes it's really important. But victimhood itself does not convey wisdom. And if you pretend that victimhood itself is the principal reason to give somebody the mic, you end up with people pretending to be victims who are no such thing. I mean, look at the ridiculous class of huckster you get in America in particular, who, you know, gets wafted up through the whole system, wafted through the Ivy League, or the educational system as a whole, and then wafted through the system, presenting themselves as a victim. You know, I can name names, but I mean they're all over the place. These are people who are tearing at closed wounds and screaming about their pain. I don't believe them.